The metamorphosis of a dowser. Before getting down to cases, we ought to go for a few definitions both for the beginning and for the end of our time together, which I must say I greatly appreciate. Metamorphosis, of course, stands for transformation or change in nature, and consciousness, as used here, has the dictionary meaning of an entire mental life of a sentient, that is, perceptive, being. In other words, the whole ball of wax of what makes us tick. Pat and Dick Wright, in my opinion, took a giant step when they opened this convention to the discussion of consciousness, which not so incidentally ties in with the conviction of the author of ASD's Constitution and bylaws that the basic function of dowsing is the raising of consciousness. By their format, Pat and Dick have got us to focus on and think about what really goes on when we search for and increasingly find the physical targets of water, gas, oil, missing persons, archaeological artifacts, along with the occasional lost wedding ring or set of keys to the car. They have got us to come to grips with the vital questions: what goes on in us when we suddenly find we can dowse, and what is there in the structure of all that's external to us, that makes it possible? I suggest we tackle the theme of dowsing being the means of raising consciousness by tying together one dowser's empiric progress through various stages of the art, with the idea that two will bring home exactly what that raising can mean. The model I use begins with an 11-year-old watching as a neighbor answers his father's request for water for a country home by cutting a fork from a wild apple tree and holding it as we teach beginners in the school today. The stick twisted down, the water was alleged to flow at a certain depth beneath it. And that was all there was to the incident except for a change in the 11-year-old mind. Why should this ritual assure us of the presence of water? There was nothing about this kind of thing at school. Does it really work? Can anyone do it? Well, he picked up the stick, it did work, and something new had been added to a young life. Questions call for answers, but the grown-ups didn't seem interested. Folklore wasn't a good explanation for the obvious reason that the stick made a consistent response, not as vigorous as when it was in the hands of the neighbor, but nonetheless exciting because it tugged from the other side of a stone wall and even across a small valley, whenever a specific presence of underground flowing water was held in mind. This discovery only raised more questions. Was this a physical phenomenon? A mental one? Both? Summer vacations provided the opportunity to check and double-check, and explore. Digging where the stick pulled did produce ice-cold water, but how could the labor of cutting through clay and chipping blue ledge be shortened? Can the stick tell depth? Can it count? Results seemed to show it could, and that this really was a mental operation, but how deep will it measure? Will a pipe with a point on it help? Alas, a well point disintegrated or bent beyond repair when it hit ledge. To prevent that, one had to know where the ledge was, where it dipped and fell in relation to the running water. Is such remote viewing normal? Let's forget it for a while. Let's play ball with the other kids. Such, in one case, were the beginnings of a new awareness. I suggest that in one way or another anyone with the will to succeed in dowsing must go through a self-imposed apprenticeship with many more losers than winners. There will be enough solid results to keep on going. The deer must still drink from some of the shallow holes brimming with that pure water that was so exciting to find, a gift from the earth to an inquiring mind. The hits, when they came, compensated for the derision of others, and for the dry holes blasted in the rock. One learned to keep counsel and never to claim, yet when someone genuinely needed water, and asked sincerely, the doors to success seemed to open of themselves. The school teacher who needed water to maintain her rental income could be helped from 40 miles away. Measurements from the side of the house, depth, flow, even the degree of hardness, all proved accurate, sight unseen and over the phone. The response to need had bypassed space, and since space and time are a function of one another, it began to look as if mind was operating in another dimension. Could it be that we are multidimensional creatures? At home, even welcome, in a multidimensional world? What can the scientists say about this? Hank Bolivet organized the first meeting of Dowsers in Danville, edits the newsletter, and keeps in touch with developments here and abroad. He says the only scientific explanation is that of the French nuclear expert, Professor Rocard, in his book Le Signal du Sorcier. He seems to say, dowsing is a function of the magnetic gradient of the change in the magnetic field of the Earth, but that can't be true, not in view of instant and accurate results from remote dowsing, with measurements to the inch. Rocard would dismiss this as psychic, which tells us nothing. Can it be we are dealing with a force, or forces, having little to do with the generally recognized electromagnetic spectrum? A long-range program might be to respond to the various requests, catalog the results, and, should a pattern develop, study it for the underlying cause or causes. EO will take years. It will be speculative, private to the point of loneliness, requiring self-discipline, risk, and the willingness to fail. So be it. Other targets presented themselves: oil and gas, lost persons. Occasional work with the police and archaeologists, and they brought with them both expensive and critical failures as well as hits made against all odds. Gradually, confirmed results at a distance became commonplace, such as the precise location of the amnesia victim wandering in the woods 2.8 miles southwest of his home, and the exact placement of status burial in 1 square meter out of a grid of 3.000. The concept of mind as a force manifesting everywhere, with which we could establish meaningful resonance, began to take form. Time apparently could be handled as a substructure of this mind, even in such ordinary tasks as determining whether this source will be an unfailing supply over the years. The practical results of dowsing, and the judgment on the basis of these results, were beginning to warrant the conclusion that we did, indeed, inhabit a multidimensional world. What went on in that realm beyond spacetime? Would the pattern of results continue to suggest, or even reveal, the contents of a parallel world? This was a quantum leap, made difficult by pure hostility and the full weight of academic science, yet the anecdotal reports we hasten to stress their character and that there is no instrumentation or accepted paradigm to bear them out seem to support an affirmation to these new questions. As always, it came in answer to a very human need. There have been many since the first, so it was not shocking to receive a letter written on behalf of a worried mother. Her son of 14 years had been frozen with fear as he watched a box on his bureau rise by itself, hover in space, and fall back to its normal position. The mother, after attempting to comfort the boy, was amazed to see the box sail across the room. There were other events of unpleasant and upsetting kind. The boy youngster would not sleep in his room. The family was at odds over what to do. Could the dowser help? Suffice it to say, the knowledge, the technique and the protection had long since evolved to empower a complete return to normality. The key word here is instantly, which provides a reasonable suggestion that what dowsers say they are dealing with docs in fact exist and is susceptible to interdiction. You must know that in outlining and illustrating a dowser's raising of consciousness and awareness, I am selecting certain events widely separated in a busy life. The dowsing part of it was pure vocation, balanced by some other important hobbies, such as earning a living. Life must be a mixture of things if we are to learn from it. And I commend this thought to you if you find yourself caught up in its quicksands. Give me no more than I can handle, and let it be in the service of my neighbor will keep your footing firm and the way clear. I venture to express this as a preface to what follows in this personal history of an expansion of awareness. A friend writes that she is interested in selling a house without the defect of a constantly flooding cellar. Can something be done? The small veins observed flowing at the level of the basement floor were simply asked to find new channels around the house, and they did. At any rate, the sump pump stopped working and the cellar was dry during the wettest season in memory. Locational dowsing has now become activational dowsing, and distance seems no barrier. Are there further instances of what dowsing can do? Ernesto was the chief engineer of a very large sugar company. He had the responsibility for making and operating the drill rigs that punched a 50-inch steel casing to a depth of 200 meters in the gravel substructure of the Andean foothills. His cooperation was a must in the location of sites likely to tap the underground flows that would meet the requirements of 1,500 GPM, and he was questioning dowsing. He suddenly appeared at the water short mill, where the bagasse was transformed into paper, a commanding personality, desiring assurance. Angle rods were thrust in his hands and he was guided over a 4-foot stream. The rods flew open again and again, but he was not convinced. "Give me the first names of your workers, Pablo, Carlos, Luis, and so on. I will tell you after each one, conscientious, lazy, unreliable, whatever the case may be." There was no change of expression on his face, but at breakfast the next morning the general manager said he had received a telephone call from Ernesto describing what had happened and confirming the complete accuracy of each response. The same type of evaluation can be effective in the plant world. The company biologist tested the dowser on many kinds of barley he was attempting to develop that would be free of the deadly rust, easily grown at various altitudes, and susceptible to industrial use. Instead of Carlos and Luis, the code names of the varieties were used. The dowser's rating was exactly what the plant selection team had discovered for themselves over the growing seasons of several years. In responding to pressing needs and sudden challenges, new patterns of accomplishment and hints of the potential of dowsing thus present themselves. It is an ongoing and unfolding revelation of nature, full of surprise and wonder. Sitting on the leather settee in the office of the president of Cervezas Nacionales in Quito, the dowser is struck by the blueprint of a distant factory in Guayaquil, several hundred miles away. That particular plant may be phased out due to the high cost of buying water from the city of Guayaquil, yet there is water there, just west of storage facility, not 30 meters from the tidal flow of the Guayas. A larger map is flown to Quito on the next plane, and the dowser draws on it the lines from the comers of the building, specifying their length to fractions of a meter, thus pinpointing, to within 1 square meter, the drilling site where they cross. He adds depth, flow, and the advice that it will be sweet and of reasonable quality. Subsequent drilling to his specifications confirms these notations made in an office hundreds of miles away, without ever having physically visited the place, and without the use of a device. Is it within each of us, without leaving home, to know and describe what lies beneath any single square meter of the planet? By simple reach of the mind? What is dowsing? What are we tapping into to perform such a service, as indeed this was? Can science help us to know? We must have the greatest respect and regard for the men of science who wish to aid us with the answers. For a dozen years Hal Puthoff has labored at Stanford Research International, at Menlo Park, California, and at our wonderful convention at the University of California at Santa Cruz. A list was carried out that was as impressive as can be, with both new and seasoned dowsers making locations on a grid that was overwhelmingly above mathematical odds. Presto! Dowsing works, yet our members have been assured of that since 1961 and before. Such tests are comforting to us, and a boon in our public relations, but do they help the individual to understand what he does, why he is successful, and why he fails? Can it be that the answer for the dowser, struggling to develop his art, involves a quantum leap in consciousness, which we defined at the beginning as the mental life of a sentient, or perceptive, human being? Before suggesting the nature and consequences of such a leap, let me make a comment on the scientific scene. If one thinks of quantum theory as a number of observer-created particles banging themselves together in random fashion, some or all with pivot waves and so creating our universe, one must admit that it is an unsatisfactory proposition. A documented dowser by the name of Einstein must have felt the same way. God does not play dice with the universe, he said, and in 1935. As a kind of reductio ad absurdum devised to show that the theory was incomplete, he and his fellow physicists Podolsky and Rosen published the EPR experiment. It was a mathematically correct statement that concluded that if quantum theory, with its statistical predictions of particle behavior, was true, it meant that twin particles behaved in the same way at the same time, an impossibility in the eyes of physicists because there could be no communication faster than the speed of light. In 1965, a physicist vacationing from his job at the accelerator of Geneva, J. S. Bell, set out to prove quantum theory right, and in the process confirmed and reconfirmed the EPR experiment. Bell's theorem, later proved in a Berkeley laboratory by physicist John Clauser in 1972. With a complicated array of apparatus, in effect said that identical particles, one say in London, and one in New York, would react in the same way, simultaneously, if a change developed in either one of them. Physicists were not overjoyed when one of their number, in confirming quantum theory, also confirmed the EPR experiment and Bell's theorem, and thus compelled them to face the issue of simultaneity, but to this Dowser, the new physics was getting somewhere and these findings make sense. Identical behavior of widely separated particles can imply a superior and governing common source, and light is a tortoise compared to the hair of mind. Mind, of course, is considered here as separate from brain, which is merely the message and memory center. The instant one thinks of water veins beneath Hadley Rill, where the astronaut first walked on the moon, some 240,000 miles from Earth, one is there. Light comes in a close second. Resonance is the winner. Further, if our belief in action at a distance is valid, the veins could be diverted with the same dispatch. It was truly said that we are co-creators, the only condition being that our action be in harmony with the creative mind of which we are a part. What does dowsing itself say about dowsing, and how it enters into this larger picture? The answer, to this practitioner, is surprisingly plain. The rod or pendulum is simply a readout device of a resonant state of mind. Resonant with what? My answer has always been the waveform of a cherished target, be it a water source at a factory in Ecuador or a status burial in Turkey. Why do I use the term waveform? Because, as dowsing finds it, there are worlds parallel to this solid and familiar one, each of a lesser density and each more seamless than the one succeeding it. I am encouraged by what Joe Peirce writes in The Mystic Spiral to the effect that the Kabbalah holds the universe consists of 4 such dimensions, bound together by a helical spiral, for that is just what this dowser has empirically found. A double spiral of complementary forces comes from an innate and latent force that is everywhere and everywhen to create all that is all the behest of what we may here call mind. The waveform can be dowsed measured here as the basic force of a tree, or a blade of grass. One has only to look for it. Beginning dowsers and children can locale eel, as I have reason know. The precedent, and less dense, dimension is another matter. There the wave that was outlined dimensionally becomes a waveform, on the next highest level it becomes the idea of a waveform, and in the highest realm it becomes what might be called the idea of a waveform, but all are connected, and are what I believe the dowser works with, whether wittingly or not. If he finds water veins at a distance, he is resonating. I believe, with its waveform. If he entrains the water vein to remove its polluted flow from a friend's well, he is both resonating and entraining, or becoming in phrase with the idea of a waveform, on the next highest level. I suggest that if a dowser can be comfortable with this basically simple concept, he or she can begin to increase his or her proficiency by seeking the signature spin that exists in the target, and that really is the target, rather than its outward form. There is a price for this proficiency, and we must be willing to pay it. It is, as you well know, the leading of a balanced life with a wholesome respect for the truth and a judgment by result. Again, it was truly said that by their fruits shall you know them. It does not take a psychic to perceive that changes are coming that will exact the best and truest that is in all of us. It is faith in you as custodians of what we call dowsing, with its limitless potential for practical service in conjunction with the raising of consciousness that sustains us and completes for me the cycle that began in a Vermont pasture so many years ago.